The following program compresses a great deal of valuable and practical information into a limited viewing time. We at LL Bean want you to get the most from this program, which has been designed for repeated viewing. We encourage you to use the various functions of your VCR, such as pause, search, and freeze frame, to closely study what you see. There are many fine books available to you on fly fishing. Among them, the LL Bean Fly Fishing Handbook by Dave Whitlock. A suggested reading list can be found in the program credits. In this introduction to fly fishing, we will cover the differences between fly casting and spin casting, the fly tackle you'll need to get started, how to tie the knots you'll most often use, fly selection, accessories, and we'll spend a great deal of time on casting and how to improve your skills. You'll also become part of a series of practical outdoor exercises as your teacher, Dave Whitlock, works with a class of fly fishing students. If you have questions or comments about this program, direct them to the LL Bean Customer Service Department, Freeport, Maine, 04033. For about as long as he can remember, Dave Whitlock has been fishing streams like this one. It wanders through a remote section of northern Maine. The stream is home to landlocked salmon, smallmouth bass, and native brook trout. Growing up in Oklahoma, Dave's first taste of fishing was with a cane pole, hook, line, and worm, trying for largemouth bass, bluegills, and catfish. He was always an inquisitive person, and as a boy read every fishing magazine he could. Eventually, he was drawn to fly fishing.
I guess probably that I was always a person who liked to turn rocks over in the water and see what was underneath them. It seemed like that here was a sport that talked about and showed about all of those things that I saw under the rocks, and that you could go out and utilize flies to imitate these things that fish were feeding on. When I was about 9 years old, I really began to put the pressure on my folks, to get me a fly rod. My dad finally, while he was up in Iowa on a welding job, went to a pawn shop and he purchased an old bamboo fly rod. It was probably 9.5 foot long. Had several of the guides off of it, and a little small rusty fly reel with probably 25 yards of silk line that had seen its better days 10 years before. He stuck that in my hands, and that shut me up for several years.
Dave Whitlock has fun fly fishing, as do the thousands of enthusiasts who enjoy this sport. Fly fishing has universal appeal to young and old, to men and women. You can fly fish on any type of water, stream, pond, lake, even the ocean. And this is a sport from which you can learn, as Dave has found in a lifetime of fishing.
And I don't think anyone can ever learn it all, because nature is always changing. There's never a year, never a season or a week that's the same. But that's what's really nice about the sport is that no matter how long you're around, there's always something new and interesting and live to learn. There's 1,000 stages you can fish on, so you just never get enough of it.
Dave is an acknowledged master of his sport and profession. He's an author and artist. He and his wife Joanne teach fly fishing around the country, spending their summers teaching at the L.L. Bean Fly Fishing School in Maine.
I call my occupation the arts of fly fishing. It's because that there are so many areas to express yourself artistically in the sport. People are always saying, well, you know, gee, how long does it take you to paint a picture, or how long does it take you to catch a big fish? And I'll say, well, so many hours plus 50 years, you know. And maybe it takes 2 weeks to do a painting, but it also took me, you know, 50 years to get to that time that I could do that. You know, a lot of people spend their entire life working in a factory or an office. I guess I'm pretty darn lucky because, well, this is my office, and this is the tool of my craft. My job is fly fishing. What I'd like to do is share with you the knowledge that I've acquired in almost a lifetime of working in areas like this, so that whether you're 8 or 80, you'll have the foundation and the enthusiasm to really come out into an area like this and become a good fly fisherman. For the person getting started, there are a lot of different choices of tackle out there. It just all depends on what method you want to use. Now, there's cane pole fishing. I guess that's the simplest and easiest to get into. Then there's bait casting and spin casting, and then fly fishing. I think all of them have one ingredient in common, and that is that they allow you to go out and catch some fish and have a good time. But if you understand the differences in the tackle, I believe you'll be able to choose which one will suit you best. I happen to have here 2 types of tackle. Probably the one that most people who have used some type of artificial lure to cast with are familiar with this one because it is the most popular. It's called spin casting. Now, to understand how this operates and compare it to fly fishing is important, and to understand all you need to know about fly fishing. So let me demonstrate this first. On the end of the rod here, I have a minnow. It happens to be a goldfish imitation. To that's attached a very thin line, about a 12-pound test line, but it's relatively weightless, and that lure weighs about a half an ounce. Then, of course, the line is spooled onto a mechanical reel. Now, in order to make that go out so I can retrieve it back in, I press this button here like that, take the rod and make a stroke like that, and release the button, and the line goes out as I energize the lure. Now, just watch this. See how it goes out, strikes the water, then I begin to reel back in. Now, if you notice, this next time that I demonstrate this, is that the lure, because it's weighted, this weighs about a half of an ounce, is going to drag this weightless line right off the reel. There it goes out. See it? Bang. Okay, now, then I just reel it back in like a little swimming minnow. Give it some action. Well, that's what fin casting and spinning and bait casting is all about, is using a mechanical reel and throwing out a weighted lure with a relatively weightless line. Now, believe it or not, fly fishing is just exactly the opposite of that. Here, I've got a reel that doesn't necessarily operate mechanically while I cast at all. In fact, it doesn't. But I've got a weighted line. The line itself has a lot of weight on it. I have a really similar lure here. It also is a little goldfish imitation, but it's called a fly, and it has literally no weight at all. It's just made out of a little bit of mylar and rabbit hair. So it's really weightless. Probably weighs 1/100th of what that other lure weighs. Well, then how do I throw it out there? Well, the fly line itself has weight to it. And I'll pull this line out, a little tangle here. That's also part of fly fishing, is tangles. You got to learn how to combat those if you want to be a good patient fly fisherman. All right, now the line itself is weighted. What I want to do here is work out some of the weighted line, swish it back and forth to the air, time to back, forward, and throw it out. Now, if you'll notice this time as I cast, watch though, the line goes out first and drags the lure behind it. That's the difference. The line itself is casting the lure, and the reel itself is really not involved. And when as I retrieve, I also strip the line in here. I don't reel the reel. And as I pick it back up and throw it back out. Now, that's the difference between fly casting and spin casting. If you've been in a tackle shop, you probably noticed there's just a bewildering array of tackle, all sizes, shapes, and colors, and lengths. And fly tackle is really not any different. There's so many different things, but what you need to do is to understand the basics of tackle, and then choosing the right tackle is really fairly simple. Actually, there are only 3 general components that you need to know about in order to choose the right tackle for yourself. There's the fly line, which also has the backing and the leader on it. That's the line system. Then there's the fly rod and the fly reel. 3 components that you need to know something about. The fly line is the key component to the tackle system, and this is what I want to describe to you first. There are about 4 things you need to know about this line: the taper of it, the weight of it, the function, whether it floats or sinks, and the color of it. Those 4 things are important. Fly lines come in 3 shapes or designs: a level, which is simply a level section of line; a double taper, which is tapered on both ends of a level section; and a weight forward, which is tapered at one end, getting larger, and then quite small at the other end. There are 3 basic types of fly lines according to their density or function. The floating line, which essentially floats on the surface or just in the surface film. Then there's a slow sinking line, which when it hits the water just barely goes below the surface. And then there's a fast sinking line that once it strikes the water, it sinks quite rapidly. Now, each of those lines also have what we call casting weight. The weight of the line itself propels the fly through the air to the target. Essentially, to start out fly fishing, you should have a floating line, 6 or 7 weight, double taper, and usually a bright color like this so that you can see it, because visibility is extremely important in being able to see your cast, being able to mend the line on the water, and being able to see the strike. It's a pretty obvious question, I'm sure. You're thinking, how in the world can you tie a fly onto this big bright line and not scare the daylights out of a fish? Well, you're right, it would scare the fish, and it would look very unnatural if you just tied the fly directly to the fly lines. So the other component of the line is the leader, a clear section of monofilament, usually tapering from about the size of the line tip down to quite small to give you the deception you need in order to make the fly look natural in the water. This fly here is tied to the end of the leader, and you can see that it's almost invisible. So this is the difference then. And then function of the leader is it gives you that invisible link between the fly line and the fly. And leaders run from about 12 all the way down to about 4 foot in length. The second component that I consider really important in fly fishing is the fly rod. It's sort of the symbol of fly rod, a long willowy pole. There are several things that we need to know about this. First of all, and I guess the most important, is that this rod must be calibrated to the line weight that you use. Usually on the handle here it will say for a 7 weight, for an 8 weight, etc. So you want to match the rod or balance the rod with the fly line. That's the first and most important component. Fly rods come in a number of different lengths. You can buy them from, say 6 foot all the way up to maybe as much as 14 feet. The 8.5 foot rod is probably the most versatile and most practical fly rod for day in and day out use. In addition to the lengths and the weights that they come in, also there are 3 materials that you'll find fly rods in most frequently: bamboo or cane, fiberglass, and graphite. Now the cane or bamboo rods are lovely works of art. They're very functional, but they're also quite expensive and fragile. Glass is really the workhorse. It's reasonable, it's very functional, and it's quite durable. Graphite, which is actually the newest material on the market, is quite expensive, but it has a super high performance rate. So it's probably more a personal choice of the material you choose as well as what you can afford. If you have kind of a pocketbook problem, the glass is obvious choice. If you really want a high performing rod that'll do the best job day in and day out, the graphite would be what I'd recommend. Other than that point, rods come in several different lengths, as I mentioned, but also they come in different sections. This rod here is a 4-piece rod. The rods on the table here are 2-piece rods. Now, why 4-piece versus 2? The 2-piece rod is more traditional, but I personally, day in and day out, like to use a 4-piece rod in traveling, whether I'm hiking or whether I'm canoeing, being on an airline or in a car. The 4-piece rod is really a much more practical piece of equipment to carry than the 2-piece rod. The third important component in the fly tackle system is the fly reel. This is a single action fly reel, and it's probably the one day in and day out that I prefer the most, and I think most other fly fishermen do, so you can say it's a traditional symbol of the fly tackle. The single action fly reel gets its name because when you make one turn of the handle, you get one turn of the spool, and you retrieve in that much line. Single action fly reels are more reliable also because of their simplicity. Other than that, they also have the ability to change spools very easily. By simply disengaging the spool, I can take another spool of a different size or different color or different weight of fly line and very quickly change it so that I'm back in business again with a second type or third type of fly line. So usually a single action fly reel with 1 or 2 extra spools will allow you to fly fish very efficiently day in and day out.
Here again are Dave's recommendations on basic tackle if you're just getting started. A graphite or fiberglass rod 8.5 feet in length. A longer rod can give you control problems. A shorter one will limit what you can do. A single action reel. It's simple, durable, and reliable. Pick up an extra spool so you have both a floating and sinking tip line with you.
In order to attach this fly to the fly tackle we've just talked about, you need to know a few knots. First of all, there are 4 knots that you should know how to tie quickly and easily in order to be able to completely attach the tackle system. The 4 knots are, first, when you attach the backing to the fly reel, you need to tie the Duncan loop knot. Then when the backing is attached to the end of the fly line, you need to tie the tube or nail knot. When the fly line itself is attached to the leader, you need to know the needle knot. Next, to attach the tip of the leader to the tippet, you need to know the double surgeon's knot. Now the tippet material is an extra section of leader that you add on to the end of the leader so that you can make it longer or change the pound test. And then to attach the fly to either the end of the leader or the tippet, you need to know again or use again the Duncan loop knot. Now those 4 knots are not used every time you go out and fish. In fact, the backing to the fly reel and the backing to the fly line and even the fly line to the leader itself are used occasionally. But the 2 knots that you use every time that you go fishing are the Duncan loop and the double surgeon's knot. Let's start with the double surgeons first. This would be the end of the leader, and this would be the leader tippet itself. If you take the 2 and lay them together, parallel, you make a common loop about the size of a 50-cent piece or half a dollar. And you take the end of the leader and the end of the tippet material and pass it through that loop twice. Once, twice. Now, before you tighten it, moisten it with your lips. This allows the knot to tighten down smoothly and firmly. Now pull on all 4 ends and the knot quickly closes. Then tighten it down a little bit more like that. And then tighten the 2 tag ends. And there's the knot. Simple, isn't it? I like this knot because, first of all, you can see it's very quick to tie. In fact, you can almost tie it with your eyes closed. And the other thing is, it's a very small knot, and it's a very efficient junction of 2 pieces of nylon. It makes a good, strong, dependable connection. After the knot has been tightened down, the next thing to do is to trim off the ends of it. I usually trim those off to just to where I can see them good. You don't want to trim them so close that they may slip, but yet you don't want to leave them too long either where they'll tangle. Then just test the knot a little bit like that to see if it's really firm and it doesn't slip. Okay, now let's just go on down to the end of the leader here. and tie the next knot, the Duncan loop knot. This is to attach the fly to the end of the leader. First, you take and thread the end of the fly line, or excuse me, the leader through the eye of the fly as such. Pull out 6 or 8 inches the tip, grasp the line like this. Again, make a loop approximately the size of a 50-cent piece, like that, with the line, and pass the tag in through that loop and around the line 4 or 5 times, depending on how heavy the leader is. The smaller leader, pass it through more, the larger leader through less. Then moisten that a bit, and then begin to pull on all 4 sides of the line to tighten the knot down. Once it's tightened down firmly like that, or forming the knot, it should look about like that. Now, this knot, why the Duncan loop? It's a very efficient knot, first of all. It has a high breaking strength, but there's another thing that really does enhance its ability to catch fish, and that is that this knot is a sliding, adjustable loop knot, so that I can tighten this right up against the fly like that, or I can adjust the size of this loop so that the fly will move more freely in the water. You see how much easier that moves, that little open loop? Or I can even adjust it larger if I need a shock effect. Now what I mean by that is that, say you're fishing for a very large fish and he hits with such intensity he may actually shear the leader off. With a larger loop like that, when the fish hits, he hits and the loop slides down, giving you a little bit of a shock absorbing effect. One more little thing to do here is to trim off this tag end. We're all set. The Duncan loop knot. The best knot you've got for fly fishing. One of the most fascinating components of fly fishing is the fly. Now, what's a fly? Well, you might think, that's an insect. Well, that's kind of a misnomer, because actually, that a fly, in terms of fly fishing, can imitate practically anything that a fish will eat or attack. Usually they're made out of either feathers or hair or some kind of a synthetic material tied onto a hook with thread, so that they have life and movement and texture and look like something that a fish might attack or eat readily on any given day. There are 2 major divisions of flies: dry flies, or flies that float, and wet flies, or flies that sink. Each is designed to represent something that a fish would eat or strike. These are dry flies, or floating flies. This is a trout fly, a royal woof. This is a grasshopper. And this is a hair frog. These are sinking or wet flies: a leech, woolly worm, a streamer or minnow, and a nymph. Any good fly should have the following characteristics to be effective: the proper size, the right shape, a correct color, and good water action. Sitting on the water's surface or floating, dry flies can imitate either terrestrial or aquatic insects, frogs, mice, or even plant seeds. Dry flies or floating flies are usually more effective to fish in warmer weather, when insects and other airborne and land creatures are more plentiful and active. But overall, wet flies are much more effective than dry flies simply because fish spend more time feeding under the water where food is most abundant. Fish also feed more regularly beneath the surface because there they are secure from land or airborne predators. I could spend all day talking about these flies. They're so fascinating to me, but probably that's all you really need to know to get started, other than maybe I might suggest that where you fish locally, you might go to the tackle dealer there and ask his advice about what flies are really working in the area, or sometimes there's some really good books written about the type of fishing you want to be doing. But sooner or later, though, I'll bet you that you'll want to take up fly tying, because to me, that's an art form, and it's at least 50% of the enjoyment of fly fishing. You can make these flies in the winter or any other time you have a few minutes. But the thing about it is that it's a rewarding pastime that you really you enjoy. You can catch fish with them. I guarantee you this, that if I can tie flies, anybody can. My grandmother bought me a fly tying kit when I was 12 years old, and I didn't know which end of the hook to put in the vise. But I kept on practicing and began to fish some of those flies, although they were bad. But you know, even though it made the fish's eyes water, they did hit them, and I caught a few panfish with them. Then over the years, I got a little bit better and a little bit better. So I guess I'd look at it this way. If you can tie your shoestrings or sign your name, you can tie flies. When I go out fly fishing, there are obvious things that I just feel like I can't do without. My waders and the vest, and for sure my fly rod. But there are 2 or 3 other accessories that I just feel like I have to have a successful day fishing. One of them is a good pair of glasses, sunglasses, but more importantly, polarized sunglasses. These special lenses cut the glare off the water so when I'm walking along, I can see through the water better, but also I can see fish better too, and that makes me fish better. It's important, though, when you buy a pair of polarized glasses, is to get tempered glass lenses. Avoid the plastic, because they tend to damage much easier with insect repellent or abrasion. Also, get the type that have a shielded side on them. This cuts down the glare from the side, as well as also protects your eyes. Now, personally, because of the way I see, I use these little bifocals on the bottom. They're just ideal for looking down through. They're clear. They're not tinted like these others, so I can tie knots on little tiny flies real easy and then go ahead and look up through the glasses while I'm fishing. But they're an excellent accessory. The other thing that I just feel like I have to have is a good hat. A hat gives you protection from the sun, the wind, the rain, the cold, but also ear protection and neck protection with a brim like this on it. The other thing is that the brim of a hat, having a dark underside like that, when you put it over your eyes, breaks off a great deal of the glare, which, avoids eye strain, as well as when you're looking into the water, you can see better. You can enjoy fly fishing by standing on the bank of a stream or pond, but I'd advise you to try wading. It's a lot of fun, and it allows you to cover the water and get to the fish a lot better. To help keep your balance, use a wading staff over this rough bottom. You can fashion one out of a ski pole or even a tree limb, but this folding model is really neat. It hangs at your side and is ready to use in a matter of seconds. To wade and stay dry, you'll need either hip boots or chest-high waders. Whichever you choose, you'll want to make sure that the boot bottoms will grip well for safe wading. A standard rubber-cleated sole works well where bottoms are sort of soft, that is, made of sand, fine gravel, silt, or mud. Use felt sole waders when you're wading over rock or rubble bottom, or even bedrock, where the bottom is often covered with slick algae. In really swift water over these rocky surfaces, use the combination sole for the most ideal result. That is, a combination of metal studs and felt. For the most treacherous wading conditions, use the aluminum cleat sandals which slip over your boots. A disadvantage to hip boots is the fact that they are cut low and can fill much more easily with water than chest waders. Don't use them in water over your knees. Chest waders are different. By wearing a belt on the outside, should you fall, the air is trapped inside the legs. Most falls occur in shallow water, but for the unexpected one that occurs in deep water, you need to be prepared. If you do fall into water over your head, don't panic. Simply relax and allow yourself to float to the surface. The next thing you need to do is stabilize your position. Do that not by kicking your legs, but by using your arms and your fly rod or dip net in order to gain the proper position, which is simply keeping your feet downstream and your head upstream. I've fallen in deep water like this a number of times, and the main advice I can give you is to keep calm. Don't panic, relax, and let the water carry you to safety. The real key thing that I learned during this demonstration was that I could maneuver myself very easily with my fly rod and my free arm. Don't be in a rush to get out. Let the current carry you to shallower water or until someone can help you out.
Now, let's review Dave's tips for safe wading. Select a boot bottom that will give you the best footing for your wading conditions. Wear hip boots only in water up to your knees. Otherwise, wear chest waders and buckle up. That belt on the outside of your waders can trap air inside them in the event you do fall. If you fall, relax. Stabilize your position using your arms to turn yourself so your head is upstream and your feet are downstream. Don't kick your feet, but use your arms and fly rod to maneuver yourself until you can safely get out of the water. In fly fishing, there are 4 major elements to casting, and that's what Dave will cover in this segment. But before he begins, let's take a look at those 4 parts. Imagine a clock on the screen. The first part of the cast is the pickup, during which you lift your rod tip from about 8 or 9 o'clock to 11 o'clock. The second is the back cast. That's when you power your rod back from 11 to 1 o'clock. The third is the forward cast. Once your line and leader have unrolled behind you, power forward from 1 o'clock back to 11. The final part is the presentation. As your line unrolls in front of you, gently drop the rod tip from 11 to about 9 o'clock, allowing the fly, leader, and line to drop to the water.
You know one of the most delightful parts about fly fishing? It's actually the fly casting itself. That might scare you, but it's really not that difficult. With this tackle and a few simple mechanics and a willingness to practice for a little while, you can be a good fly caster. For the ideal pickup, cast, and presentation, let the rod, your hand, wrist, arm, and even shoulder move in one smooth motion. Just relax and let the rod do the work. To develop this smooth casting motion, you've got to practice a few hours each day in order to get the hand and the rod working together. Always use a fly on the end of your leader to practice casting. This will give you the proper effect. But clip the hook off so that you don't snag trees or bushes or yourself. One more time now. Let the rod, your hand, wrist, arm, and even shoulder move in one smooth motion. Always use a fly on the end of your leader to give the proper effect. Clip the hook off so that you don't snag trees or bushes or yourself. The key to good fly casting is loop control. The fly cast has 2 parts. the back cast and the forecast. I've got here a little tool I use for indoor and outdoor sheltered area casting that's just perfect to demonstrate the back and the forecast as well as loop control theory. It's called a fly-o. Nothing more than a short rod and some very visible yarn so that you can watch the casting as it develops. Let's start out with the back cast first. I lift the line up, flip it back and forward, cast it back and forward. Notice how the line is unrolling on itself, forming more or less of a loop shape as it rolls out. This is what we call the loop, or as the fly line unrolls. The shape of that loop determines the efficiency of the cast. And the way the loop is formed is the arc that I pass the fly rod through as I stroke forward and back, forward and back. The narrower the loop is, or the more perfect shaped it is, the better the cast goes through the air. The wider the loop is, the less efficient it is. And that is simply generated by the arc I pass the rod through. A wide arc like this, the line falls relatively energetically through the air, back and forth, very poor. A short, narrow stroke like that allows the loop to go through the air very efficiently. And those are the basics of fly casting. It's a good thing to practice with this fly-o yourself. Make yourself one, get out and practice a little bit and learn this stroke before you actually begin using a fully rigged fly rod. Here's a good way to understand the arc-loop relationship. Imagine a clock to my right. You can create a well-shaped loop, one that's nice and tight, just by starting your back cast with your rod at about 8 or 9 o'clock, lifting the tip to 11 and powering back to 1. Watch that loop take shape. Just as it nears the end, begin the forward cast. Then repeat the back cast motion once your forward loop begins to unroll. Power back from 11 to 1 and the line rolls out. Watch it straighten. Then power forward to 10 or 11 to complete the cast. One more time. Back. Watch that loop form. You can't see what you're doing wrong if you don't watch the loop in both directions. So watch your back cast, watch the forward cast. I can't emphasize that too much. Watch those casts while you're learning to form the loops properly. Work on this casting cycle. Pick up, back cast, forecast, presentation. This is just one of those things that you're going to have to practice. What we want to do today,
Dave spends a great deal of time teaching others how to fly fish or how to improve upon the skills they already have. His clear, practical approach to teaching this sport has opened up a whole new outdoor world for many people who might otherwise have never tried fly fishing.
Getting off on the right foot sometimes is really important in being able to practice efficiently. And what we want to do is cut this practice down as quick as possible so we can go fishing. So, first of all, if you can pick a place where you can stand that's relatively clean around here, and also that you have a good back cast area here, so when you're throwing 20 or 30 feet of line up here, it doesn't hang in the trees. Past that point, I want you to be able to watch your back cast. So if you're standing like this, it's more difficult to do that. But your back cast is just as important to watch as your forecast. So what I would advise you to do is to bring your foot around like this, sort of pivot it around like that. Keep this one like that, so that when you're casting this way and this way, it's easier to watch. So you can kind of pivot around like that, okay? Try to pick an area where, first of all, where there's water, and usually calm water is best. Flowing water adds some other problems that we don't need at this point. Now the next thing is that make sure when you're practicing always that you have a hookless practice fly on, something that's visible so you can see it going through the air, just like the bright line. This will enhance your ability to watch, to see what you're doing right or wrong, because fly fishing is a very visual sport. You watch the line constantly, you watch the fly constantly. Once you're ready to practice, if you've got the position, you've got a relatively clean area here. Take your fly and hold it in your left hand and just strip off some line. Remember we said that this line is your casting weight. Usually about 20 to 25 feet of line is about really all you want to start out practicing with. If you get more than that, it requires build some problems into your casting. If you get less than that, you don't have enough weight to efficiently operate the line and the fly, so it kind of messes you up. All right, so what we want to do next is to get this line out past the guide. Now there's a couple ways of doing it. You can just pull it out like this, just sort of switch the rod back and forth, time to, so we're in a roll cast motion. Now I've got the line out in front of me. The next thing we want to do is hold the fly here, lift the rod up like this. Now the casting weight's there, and I'm simply going to roll that line in front. I'm going to get it in front of me so that when I'm ready to start casting, I can start my back cast with the line in front and back up here and forward. So hold the line like the fly out here, and just hold it with the tail very loosely. And as that rolls out like that, just as the leader pulls right there, turn loose to the fly. Now watch real carefully and I'll do it. Flip it out, rolls out in front of you. Drop your rod tip down, take this line, take the line in this hand. This is the hand that controls the line all the time you're fishing and all the time you're casting. It's important. Next thing is assume a grip on top of the rod where the thumb is on top of the handle and your fingers are wrapped around. That's a good, comfortable grip. It offers the most stability, and it makes the rod and your arm and your hand an integral part, working all together. Drop the rod tip down, initiate next the pickup. In other words, I'm going to lift the line off the water up into the casting plane so I can cast it back and forth. The pickup is just as important as the back cast or the forecast, because this is where it starts. If you get a bad pickup, your back cast will not be efficient. So lift the line off the water. Don't jerk it off the water, but I'm lifting the line off the water like that. What you're really doing is you're lifting the line up and putting it into that casting plane right there. So you think you lift it up, and just about the time the line is completely lifted off the water or starts to lift off the water, then you initiate your back cast. Now watch as that comes off. Just follow the rod tip back. Watch that rod tip. Forward, lift, back, and forth. Now that's the general casting stroke. So let's go through this whole routine one more time very quickly. All right, so what we want to do is we start with the rod tip low, lift the line off the water, and just about the time the line tip itself begins to come up off the water, then start your back cast. The back cast, the next step is to bring the rod from about 10:30 or 11, where you started your back cast, back to about 1 o'clock in a smooth, gradually accelerating stroke, and then stop it. And just before you stop it, kind of bring the wrist over just a little bit. That brings the tip out of the line of the fly line so that the line itself will not engage the tip. Okay, now let's do that. Pivot it on this foot, drop the line down, lift off, flip back, watch it go back, and just as it turns over back there, start forward with that same smooth stroking action. Lift, flip back, stop, come forward, flip, stop. Flip, flip, stop, flip, stop. See, so it's a back, stop, forward, stop. In that short clock area there from about 1 o'clock to 11, 11 to 1, 1 to 11. That casting stroke is important to understand. It's not a waving wrist action whatsoever. Learn to make a casting stroke by lifting the rod arm almost goes in a straight plane. Get here to about 10:30, 11. Bring the rod back to 1. It's in a slow sort of a flip. You use enough power to throw the line up. Just think, I'm going to have enough power to throw the line up, stop it right there, let it unroll, watch it unroll. If you don't watch it, you don't know what it's going to do. So if I cast back and don't watch, it may fall behind me. Then I've got to exaggerate my casting motion to get it to come in front of me. It doesn't work that well. So that's the routine I want you to practice, is line in front, lift, back cast, forecast. Stop the rod right about 11, let it unroll, and then gradually let it come back down. Now false casting is casting back and forth a couple of times, back and forth, just to feel the timing, and then make the presentation down. Is that clear? I've shown you sort of the basic pickup, back cast, forecast. Rather than just constantly practice that becomes kind of redundant and you have to get sort of tired. Also add this to your practice routine, and that is the presentation and then what we call a 2-point control, where you begin to fish so that you can retrieve the line or set the hook efficiently. So the pickup, back cast, fore cast, and just as the line unrolls, start to tip down, drop it to the water. The next thing is that take this line and put it under your index finger like that and hold it here to retrieve it. This is what we call the 2-point control. 1 point here, 2 point here. That way, anytime that you hook a fish or you need to retrieve line, you always have a point here where you don't allow the slack to develop. If you hold it here and you pull a line back, that's all the farther you can retrieve. And then you have extra slack. So always, just as the line comes down, just as you make your presentation, line and roll, follow the rod down, put this under there, and retrieve like this, or tighten the line up. Always do that. Then when you get ready to cast, bring it off, up, hold the line. Get in the habit of doing this. Every time the fly hits the water, by the time the fly actually strikes the water, you ought to have that underneath there. Why? Because that's when the fish can hit that fly. And if you're holding it like this, you're not prepared to really set the hook and retrieve the line. But here, when it comes down, you can retrieve that line and never give them slack, like that. It's really an important key to good fishing. So get in your practice of back, forth, time or two, make your presentation under here, and retrieve it like this. Now, the other thing is, another point is that it's an easy habit to get into, and it's a wrong habit. When you make your cast, if you want to shoot this extra line out, of turning loose of it. Now, that's all right in a sense, but what happens is if you've got quite a bit of line out, and you do that, the line will slap around the rod here. And that can create a lot of friction and is also tighten up. So what I'd prefer to see you do, get in the habit right offhand, is when you make a cast, just form a second guide there. You see how that kept that away from there? So that this guide here is important in stabilizing the line into the rod, but also just make one more guide into this area here so the line can slip out through. That's just a good technique to get started with it. Up, separate, make your cast, and when you shoot line, just hold it like that. See, it'll go out just as well, and it doesn't slap around here and tangle up. Also, sometimes when you hit it just right, the line will actually come around your reel. But if you always hold it out like that, you won't have that problem. In the correct presentation, what you're trying to do is get the fly, leader, and line to strike the water in that order. In order to make it strike in that order and accurately, as the line travels forward, and just as it unrolls, you bring the line down with the rod tip. As the loop moves forward and begins to fall, you begin to bring the rod tip down. Now watch this, as the loop comes forward right there, you begin to bring the rod tip down, and watch, it's almost like a follow through. Make the cast, stop the rod tip as the line falls, I bring the rod tip down. Back, and watch this, as the line unrolls, right as it just starts to unroll, I bring the rod tip down. If you bring it down too soon, the effect is not proper, but really, the best presentation is the quicker the fly can hit the water and the line and the leader, like that. So it's a follow through after the stop. Stop, follow through. Pick it up, cast, present. Cast, present. You just tap it right at the very end. The most power comes right at the very end.
Right where?
No, but I mean, look, right there. Just think you're hitting you've got a nail out here. You have a hammer, you go bang.
Okay.
If you go too quick, you'll miss the nail. So
Learning to cast well takes practice, lots of it, and it doesn't come automatically to most people. You've got to expect to run into problems, especially in loop control. But don't worry, you're not alone.
Cast here for a second. I want to see it. Actually, okay, now just bring your rod all the way back up here like this, see? And down, see? Up. No, let it come all the way back. And that, see, you got to get the line behind you, so let it slide right all the way up to there. Now just make a tight loop stroke forward now. There, see that pretty?
A key to good fly casting is making a tight, well-formed loop. But as Jody has learned, it's also one of the most difficult things for the beginning fly caster to do.
I want you just to relax. I want to show you a little bit of something here. You remember whenever I was talking about the beginning cast where we make a fairly short stroke between about 11 and 1, back and forth? Well, what you're doing, honey, is you're bringing the rod all the way back to 3, then coming all the way to 9, and that makes that big wide loop, and that's why it's kind of being poopy going back and forth, because you don't have a good direction. Now, here, let me just take the rod and I'll show you here. Now, what we want to do is start right here and go to here and stop it. Now, that's about 1 o'clock. Then come back to about 11 and stop it right there. That'll tighten that loop up. Now, let me just give you a couple of strokes here. You just kind of follow along with me. Up, down, almost like you're throwing it up and down. It's a little short stroke. You give that a try. Excellent. Okay, try it again. All right, now you see that how your loop's tightened up?
Sure.
See my tire line? Excellent. Very good. All right. That looks good. Feels better too, doesn't it?
Yeah.
See how it's just going right out, straight out, and laying out in the water rather than falling in a big pile in front of you. Oh, that's good.
Bruce is having trouble with his forward cast. The line smacks the water, and that kills the cast.
I tell you, you notice how your line, Bruce, is kind of hitting the water and sort of falling in a pile out there? Yeah. That's a pretty common problem when you first get started out. And what causes that is that essentially when you make your back cast, you're stopping it just about the right direction, right up here. But you're bringing your forecast too far forward, and that just makes that line follow the rod tip right into the water. This time, take and make your cast and stop it up here a little higher, about 11 or 10 or 11 o'clock, and just let the line roll out there, and then bring the rod down. Let me just give you just a quick up, stop it right there. See how it rolls out and up? Like that. See, I'm stopping the rod right in this area right here. Now just try that. All right, now you see that it straightened right out that time. It didn't pile up. Give it another try. That's it. Now just keep your rod tip fairly high. Good, excellent. Now see there that just by keeping the rod tip high, you corrected that little problem that you had. All right, and it's letting it turn over. Very good.
A good pickup and correct timing are essential to getting off on the right foot in casting. Diane is having difficulty with both.
Diane, you hear that line hitting the water behind you and it's not going out very well in front of you?
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what's happening, honey. Remember I said that when you're casting that you want to start your rod tip low and kind of lift your line off the water and bring it back. And what you're doing is you're making too much pause. The time you start your cast, you sort of stop your rod, the line sags and it's loose there. And then you have to bring it all the way back to take up all that slack. So just hang on to your line here. Let's roll it out in front of you first. Now, start the rod tip low and just lift up and stop right there. Come right back down. See? Lift up. See, we're starting to cast actually pretty low. See, lift, up, down like that. Now you try that. That's it. Very good. Excellent. Lift. Now lift it up. Watch your back cast. Very good. Now see the difference in that? You're not hitting the water back here.
Oh, it feels much better.
Yeah. Okay.
Sounds
Drop your rod tip down a little bit lower. Now pick it up. That's all in one motion. That's it. Good. All right. See, just by dropping the rod tip, you get all that slack up. You get your cast done by 1 o'clock and it's back. Very good.
Robbie has been fishing these northern Maine waters most of his life. He's quite a good young caster, the motion coming almost naturally to him. But he, like Diane, is having a timing problem.
I think that what you're doing here is that you're letting your back cast fall a little bit too far back before you start forward. Also, hold your thumb right up on top. That'll help you stop your back cast. And this time, instead of letting it go back so far and fall, come forward just a little bit quicker. Now let me just give you just a quick, just hang on, just act like you're casting up, down. See, a little more quicker that way. See, up, down like that. Okay, now give that a try. Oh, perfect, great. That's exactly what you're. Ooh, look at that loop. Now see how that goes out there so much better? It goes out there straight rather than fall. That's because you've tightened your loop up rather than letting it fall down. Very good, Rob. Now try it one more time. Good, good cast. That feel better too? Doesn't it feel a lot better to you? Can you feel the line pull back there? Okay, that's great.
Now here are several other problems most new fly casters run into, and some suggestions on how to solve them. Sarah is demonstrating what is known as the tailing loop, a problem that ruins your forward cast and often results in the line dropping in a pile on the water in front of you. It's usually caused when the fly caster begins a power stroke before either the back cast or the forward cast is complete. Sometimes it's a case of too much power too soon. To correct a tailing loop, watch your loops unroll and begin the power stroke slowly as the line and leader are unrolling. Then apply the power gradually and smoothly. Peter is showing you the problem of the snapping fly. Often you'll hear a sharp crack when you cast, and many times your fly will be snapped completely off your leader or tippet. Usually the problem is caused by beginning the forward cast too soon. Sometimes it's a case of a weak back cast, and the line cannot straighten out by the time you begin your forward cast. Watch your back cast, adjust your timing or power, and your problem is solved. One of the first problems the beginning fly caster runs into is the one Jim is demonstrating. The fly line leader and fly don't travel as far as you want them to. Usually it's caused by inefficient casting technique or improperly balanced tackle, or both. If you know your rod and line sizes are correctly matched, then check the size of your loops. They're probably too large. Work to tighten your loops and concentrate on better timing in all parts of your cast. It just takes practice. Aside from the standard overhead cast, one of the most useful other casts you'll need to learn is the roll cast. Jody is working on her roll cast. But as she learns, not bringing the rod and line back far enough to begin with and then driving the rod tip too far forward make for a poor roll cast. She corrects the problem by bringing the rod tip back just behind her shoulder, giving the line time to collect behind her. Then she drives the rod tip forward and her line rolls out.
One of the most difficult things for a fly fisherman to cope with or contend with is wind. It can either make you or break you on any given day, and a lot of people who just don't want to fly fish when it's windy, but there's really no reason why that should stop you if you can understand wind and use it to your advantage rather than your disadvantage. For instance, if the wind is blowing face on, that's what most people dislike, because when they cast into the wind, the fly comes blowing right back to them. Well, there's a reason for that. The reason is that as the loop travels into the wind and stops and loses its energy, the wind blows the fly back towards you. What you want to do is you want to be able to cast the fly low into the wind so that the minute it turns over, it's on the water. While it's got energy moving forward, it hits the water. Now, there's a good gust of wind here. Let me demonstrate. Rather than casting it high like that and letting it blow back. See how it comes blowing back to me? I cast it. Use the wind to bring the back cast up high like that and then down low. And see the fly turns over right on the water. High back cast, let the wind blow it, and cast down low because there's almost no wind here. The minute the fly hits the water or turns over and hits the water, the wind has no way with it. But if it's up high like that, the wind can blow it back. Now that's the basis to almost all wind casting, whether it's to your back or to your face. For instance, if I'm casting upstream and the wind's blowing at my back, that's the one I hate the most because that's the one that you get a hook in your ear or it wrapped around. Why? Because as you cast like this, the wind tends to blow the fly down and off course. So what you want to do is just exactly the opposite that we did whenever it's to your face. And that is through a low back cast under the wind here, a high back cast, forward cast there, and let the wind carry the fly out. But if you throw high here, the wind will blow the fly down, and as you come forward then, it'll catch and hit you in the back or the ear. So what you do is throw a low back cast, a high forecast, and let the wind carry it out. A low back cast, a high forecast. Just exactly the opposite when it's at your face. All right, now for instance, that if the wind is blowing off my casting arm, in other words, up this way, across my body, from my casting arm side across my body, what would the tendency of the wind will do would be to drag the line and the fly across my body. So if I'm casting like this, the wind will blow the fly across my body. It's a good chance that I'll hit my head or my shoulder or my back with it. In order to avoid that, I take the rod and bring it to the other side of my body, not the rod, not the handle and the reel itself, but just the rod tip. Now I cast back and forth there, and you see the line and the fly are on the other side of me. So even if it blows it across, it's not blowing it across me. Then keep it low. Keep it low on your back cast and your forecast underneath the wind and slide it in like that. That'll compensate for the wind coming across this way. Then if the wind is off of this shoulder, and I'm standing like this and the wind's blowing this way, I do just the opposite. I cast sidearm to this side. Now again, the wind's blowing this way, blowing the fly line and the fly away from me. Keep it low, always keep it low under the wind, it'll drop right in. That's the big secret, is to try to keep the fly under the wind as much as possible when you're casting into that wind. We've got a little bit of problem here.
In addition to learning to work with wind, you have to learn to work around obstacles.
Now I've made this an overhand cast, and you see the problem I've got. My fly is hung up in the bush there, so I've missed the target. This is why we teach you to cast different types of angles. In other words, a sidearm cast would be the solution there, because the loop is going to go low and under. Now watch this sidearm cast. You see how the loop goes right in underneath that. So a sidearm cast, whether it's a roll cast like that, or just a standard back and forward cast like that, laying the loop on its side will get it right in underneath that obstruction and on target, and bang, that's where your fish would be. So rather than a high overhand cast like that, which is a problem, use your sidearm cast and get out of there. The other nice thing about a sidearm cast is that fly and line comes in low and the fish doesn't see it. So before it hits the water, the high overhand cast, quite often they will. So remember your sidearm casting. It's so critical to really good fly fishing. Another good place for a sidearm or curve cast is to be able to cast in behind or around an object. You see this area over here? There's a fish probably laying in behind that log. Now that calls for a sidearm curve cast to bring the fly in and drop it in behind that log. Now watch very closely. Here, the sidearm, tight loop cast, and I let it snap in behind the log. Pull it out, sidearm cast, tight loop, let it snap in behind the log. See how that's going in there? It's actually cast behind the obstacle. That's an important cast because fish like to hide behind objects rather than in the front side of them. This is a good place to fish, but it has one problem. Take a back cast and you're in trouble. Bang, you're up here, hung up. So this is obviously the solution to this would be to utilize a roll cast. It's a perfect situation where you can't make a back cast conveniently. The roll cast, simply bring the line up like this, roll it forward. Up, get just behind you, cast it forward. See? Just let that slide up, just watch it. To the end of the trees and roll it forward. So I can make a good cast without hanging up in the trees every time and at least be able to fish that water over there. Simple as that. I like a roll cast because it does allow me to fish some waters that wouldn't be conveniently fished otherwise.
Let's take another look at a cast Dave uses frequently, and one you'll find you do too, the sidearm cast. It's the basic fly cast, just laid over on its side. It's effective for casting around objects or in situations where an overhead cast or roll cast might cause your line to get caught in overhanging brush or trees. Fly fishing is a sport anyone can enjoy. But to catch a fish on fly tackle takes a bit of effort on your part. You've got to work on your casting and on hooking and landing a fish. When you feel a strike, quickly tighten the line to set the hook. If you're slow, that bass or trout will simply spit your fly back out. Keep tension on the line. Allow the fish to jump. Don't overpower it and just haul it in, but don't overplay it either. You can injure it. Once the fish has tired, it will swim to you, and you can land it with a net or your hand.
Now, whenever a fish is in the water like this, what you want to try to do is just ease him up. Pulling him upstream, you're trying to pull a hook out of his mouth anyway, so just let him fight and work him easy like this. Yeah, I've just got the rod bend. Just let him,
And in his classes, Dave teaches his students more than just how to catch a fish.
That. All right, now, what we want to do, we don't want to hurt him. We just want to really take him easy. Yeah. I'll just slip my hand right underneath him like that. Don't grip it. See, my hand's wet now. Okay, now, if we want to release this fish, we want to be as gentle as possible to him. So what we do is just slip the hook out of his mouth like that, and then just revive him in the water until he. You know, the idea of catch and release anyway, I think it's, you know, it'd be nice to eat that fish, but you'd be so much better off back in the water, you know, just because that you might catch him again. And living free like that, he'll reproduce, or someone else will have a good time with him, you know. I don't know, it's just sort of recycling trout. It's an idea that makes it pretty special. You know, we'll just put him back and so that, bye-bye. Come back and catch him again someday, okay? It's your turn or your turn now. Yeah, I know. See all that stuff coming down in there? Okay.
Dave encourages his students to learn as much as they can about the life of the stream they intend to fish. You should too. One way to do that is to seine a part of the stream.
At first, it just appears like it's a bunch of gravel, but you see those things crawling around? Those are different types of aquatic insects. And there's stoneflies there. There's some mayfly nymphs. There's caddis nymphs in here, or caddis larvae.
What's this large one?
That's a stonefly nymph, Jody. Looks almost like a little roach, doesn't it? But it's an aquatic insect called a stonefly. And yeah, look at there, there's a couple of dragonfly nymphs in there too. They all look like worms, but to a fish they look like something really good to eat. Why don't we go over here and take a little bit closer look at all of these. Let's try it right in here. It's a good spot. That way our bugs won't get away from us in the water. Let's get down here. Yeah, we got quite a haul here, didn't we? Now let me just pick a few of these out. What we're going to do is put them in the plate in a minute, but let me just get a couple of these in my hand here and identify them for you all. Now all of these like this, they look like a little roach to me, but they're a stonefly nymph and they've got characteristics it's easy to identify. Now see, those are all the same nymph. See, they got two antennae here and two tails and real heavy legs. And also notice they got like two wing pads here on it. Turn them over, they're lighter colored on the bottom, and they have their gills right in between their legs. It's kind of a fuzzy white area there. Now these live about 2 or 3 years in the stream, and then they crawl out on the bank and hatch out into the mature adult, which lives about a week. They mate, lay their eggs back in the water to complete the life cycle. But let me pick up some of these little green worms. Pick up a few of those. Now we're talking about green worms. They're actually called larvae, caddis larvae. They live on the sides and underneath the rock. Notice how bright green they are. The other one was kind of brown on top and yellow on the bottom. And this caddis larva is sort of an olive green and has sort of a dark back and sort of a dark head and little short legs that look like a worm. Now, probably from past experience, this is what the trout and the salmon in this river are going to hit today, because it's a real effective pattern to fish right along the bottom. One thing too to remember, that anytime you find something like this, where did you find it? Did you catch it on the bottom, along the sides of the river, or what have you? And that's where you should fish those with most success.
What do these turn into when they hatch out?
Sarah, they turn into what we call a caddis fly. It looks like a little brown moth with kind of a green or olive colored body. And they flutter around in the evening over the water. You can tell that they look like a little small moth fluttering. When they light, they have a little sort of a tent-shaped wing, and it's kind of mottled brown in color. You know that nice brook trout that I caught the other evening? Well, this is what I caught it on, that little green caddis worm imitation, about a size 12. You know, just about 3/8 of an inch long. this fish now. Just, cast it upstream and just let it tumble along. If you drop a few of these in the water, Robbie, you can watch they just kind of tumble along. They don't swim at all. They just kind of crawl and tumble along the bottom. So what you'd want to do is take your imitation and cast it upstream, let it sink to the bottom, and just sort of let it roll downstream without letting it drag across or coming up to the surface. That's the most effective way to do it. Now, let's see if what I've got in the box here that'll imitate these green caddis worms. Sarah, what do you think would imitate that, or what you got in there? Pick me out a good imitation of that. Okay, get it out of there for a second. Now, what you need to do is wet that for just a minute, Sarah, in the water. Now, put it up here beside these worms. The reason I wanted you to wet it is because that whenever they're wet like that, they'll change color, and they'll get either darker or brighter in color. See that? This one here is more the average size of those. See? But that's what I'd use. Sometimes, you want to try a couple of sizes. Usually the smaller size will be more effective than the larger size. What you want to do is try to match the general size and the general color. They don't have to be just exactly, but similar. And if you've got the size and the shape and the color of it and you fish it right, you've got a good imitation. The other thing is, of course, that when they grab it, you got to remember this doesn't taste the same as that. So you've got to set the hook quick because they're going to grab a hold of it and spit it right out. So it's up to you to be alert enough to detect that strike and set the hook. I guess that's all there is left to do now is to tie one of these imitations on our leader and go catch fish. Let's go try it.
Dave's approach to fly fishing is a practical one. Learn as much as you can about the sport and the aquatic environment, then apply what you know. Using what they learned seining the stream, Dave and his students went back to having fun, fishing. They tried an assortment of flies, but Robbie stayed with the green caddis worm, which had been found in such abundance. His persistence paid off.
Hey, what'd you get him on? Huh? That's a nice sample. What? Really? Great. Works, doesn't it? Here, let me get over here. All right, beautiful fish. All right, now just ease him in. Just kind of back up here. Give him a little shallower water. That's far enough now. Don't let the leader get inside the guides. Beautiful fish. All right, he's getting tired. One more good run, huh? All right. Wore out. Okay, now just bring this rod back and just sort of slide it. Give it a little bit more line. Now bring it back and just kind of put your net in the water now. Let's unhook it here for you. Attaboy. Okay. Now just bring him back. Come on. Attaboy. That's it. Oh, what a nice fish. Oh, all right. Beautiful. Congratulations. What a fish. Beautiful. Oh, man. Gee, let's put him in the water here before he won't die. What did he hit? He hit that green caddis worm? Yeah. You want to release him?
Yeah, I think I will.
Just that barbless hook, it ought to slip right out, Robbie. There we go. Now then, the next thing you want to do, I'll take your fly. Next thing you want to do is just kind of give him some artificial respiration, because he's tired, and just sort of working back and forth in the water. Just let him kind of come out of the net there. Oh, I bet you just up and down like this, just kind of easy. Yeah. And you'll kind of feel him gaining some strength. Okay, Robbie, now what you want to do is you kind of feel him getting a little bit stronger now. And now just sort of let him slide out of your hand. Just see if he'll swim now. Just kind of give him a little nudge.
Let him go?
Yeah, just let him go. Easy. Yeah, now give him a little push. Let him go on out in the rock. There he goes. Oh, isn't that nice? Goodbye. Free again. Hey, congratulations. Fine job. That fly fishing's not so bad, is it? That's neat. Oh, that does me good to see that. Whew. Well, I guess we ought to go get another one, huh?
Yeah.
All right. If there's anything I enjoy more than catching a fish on a fly myself, it's seeing my students do it. They're having a good time up there, I'll guarantee you. I'll bet you anything they're not thinking about income tax or world problems or homework. but they're up there having fun, and that really makes me feel good. And that's exactly what I want you to do. I want you to go out and have fun fly fishing.